Hey, want to see something cool? Yeah. Open your browser and type vscode.dev and press enter. And boom, you get VS Code running right in your browser. You can open a folder on your local machine. So I'm going to select this folder here. Ask me if I want to view the files. Then I can look at all the code inside. So I can do all of the code editing that I would normally do. And that includes things like multiple cursors. And when I make changes to this file, these changes, if I click save, are saved to my file system. Now, here's another cool thing you can do. If you come to extensions here and find a theme that you like a lot, let's say Fairy Floss, just right click and say copy extension ID. Now try this, come up here, type theme, and then paste the extension ID. Copy that URL, send it to a friend, and what's up, folks? Welcome to the VS Code weekly live stream. We have an exciting one for you today. We're going to talk about vscode.dev. Hopefully you saw that announcement yesterday. I think that was yesterday. It seems like years ago. It was yesterday. We're going to do that today. And it's very exciting for us because we have so much to show you. Before we get started, as usual, go to YouTube, youtube.com/code, and subscribe. Subscribe. We really appreciate that. Hang out with us on TikTok, tiktok.com/@vscode. We'd love to connect with you there. And don't forget about our meetup group. All right, we got all the bases covered. I think we do. Awesome. So thank you for being with us today. We are covering a big announcement. I mean, there's no other way to put it. When we did VS Code Day back in, what was that, January, I think? Man, that feels like, oops, turn the volume down. Sorry about that. It feels like a lifetime ago, but back in January, the keynote session, Eric Gamma talked about VS Code, an overnight success 10 years in the making. And one of the things that he mentions in his keynote is that when he first came to work at Microsoft, that his mandate was sort of to build an editor in the browser that didn't feel like it was in the browser. And as of yesterday, vscode.dev has launched in sort of the realization of that vision. And to talk with you about that today, we've got Bridget Murtaugh, my colleague, one of my favorite people, and PM on the VS Code team. Let's see. Let's add Bridget. Hey, there she is. Hey, Bridget.
Hey, Burke. What a great way to start the day. One of your favorite people. Good for the web. Like, what could get better than this? Thank you so much.
I set the bar. I apologize. I've had too much coffee and I'm feeling overly friendly. So, your audio is just a tad quiet. Is there any chance you could turn that up just a bit?
It is a tad quiet. I don't think I've changed anything on my microphone.
Really tad quiet.
Okay.
So really the problem is me, as is per usual.
That's okay. We'll work together.
Now we're gonna have another guest. Do we need to add that person now, or should we save that for later?
Should do an introduction.
Hey, Tana, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
This is my other favorite person. Can you have two? I mean, you can only have one favorite person.
You can have more than one. I like chocolate and ice cream. It's hard to pick.
That's true. When all my kids are around, I tell them, like, when the others aren't around, I'll say, "Don't tell your brothers, but you're my favorite." But then I say that to all three of them. I don't know is that bad parenting? I don't know.
You're playing with fire for sure.
Yeah, probably a problem. So anyway,
don't let them watch this.
Yeah.
I'm off topic. So back to the subject, vscode.dev. I gave an intro, but Bridget, Tana, what is it and what are we doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So Burke touched on this, but the VS Code team's original vision was really to build a development tool that could run fully in the browser. So we've been hard at work bringing that vision to life, and we're super excited to show you more. So without further ado, I think I can hop into some demos to really just show you what it looks like live. So I can go ahead and share my screen.
Awesome. Let's see it.
Do a few clicks. Not as smooth of a transition as you know. Making it out to be there. All right. Are you able to see that there?
Not yet. Hold on. Let's see here. Where's your screen? Oh, it's coming up. There we go. What is that? It's a nice picture.
All right. That is what Edge has shown us here.
Y'all know what this is? Anybody chat and recognize this picture? I'm curious.
Yeah, chat, let us know. It's a cool picture. All right. So if I go to vscode.dev, that's all you have to do to get to VS Code for the web. See, it loads instantly, and it looks just like the VS Code that we already know and love. And so with this here, we didn't have to install anything, and we're going to have a lot of functionality that we can go ahead and explore. So let's try out some things. We can go ahead and let's try creating a new file. You can see I already have a few different options here for maybe some different extensions I have installed, but let's just start with a text file, for instance. And also, just like the desktop, I can go ahead and select a language to get started. So VS Code is still going to guide me throughout the process. And I think I want to start off just with some Markdown. Sounds like a good way to start my day. And I want to say hello from the web. You know, sometimes I don't always remember my Markdown syntax perfectly. So I want to go ahead and open a preview. See, we can totally do the same functionality that we're used to in the desktop. It's awesome. And then if we like this file, I can go ahead and file save or Control S. And I could save it to my local machine, which is awesome. And so we really have this cool local development tool. And then rather than just creating new files, I can also go ahead and open projects or files that I already have on my local machine. So I'll go ahead and close out of this. I don't need to save it. I'm not too committed to that header file right now. So what I can do here is I'll say open folder over in the Explorer. And I have this HTML project that I've been dabbling with. So I'm going to go ahead and open it. And we can see that VS Code prompts me to grant permission, essentially, for the website to be able to view the files. So I'm going to grant access. And that's because browsers like Edge and Chrome are able to use the file, what's it called? Like the File System Access API. That's what it is. And so that's going to basically give the web page access to my local file system. So that way I can go ahead and use VS Code for the web to do local development, which opens up some really neat scenarios. So I can go ahead and work on projects that I have saved locally, like this one. And even for other scenarios, like where I don't want to install anything, I can go ahead and work on lower powered machines like a Chromebook. Or it opens up to these really cool scenarios where I could do development on an iPad. We know that's something that folks are really interested in. And with the launch yesterday, we've already seen people using it on iPads.
I'm very interested. Yes,
everywhere.
I need an excuse to get the giant iPad. I feel like this is it.
Yeah, so we can see here that in our HTML file, you can see we get syntax highlighting. We're going to get completions. We're going to get information as we highlight some of this text here. And let's say I'm not super committed to some of this coloring that I have in my header. So what I can do here is I get the CSS color picker that I'm used to in desktop, which is awesome. I can go ahead and change the color. I'm prompted to save my changes. And I've been previewing my file over here. Just refresh it real quick. Automatically loads up. It's a pretty cool development tool to work on these local projects. So with this experience, we see that for these like webby type languages like HTML and CSS, we're really going to get a super familiar experience, just like the desktop essentially. But really for most languages, we're going to have some level of support. So some level of like syntax highlighting or completions or bracket pair colorization. And we'll get even more into that a little bit later on in the presentation. But I'm going to close out of this for now. I'm happy with my singular change. I think that's good. So we've seen how we can now start new local files or open existing local files and projects. And beyond just the local files, we can also work on projects that are stored remotely. So for instance, if I have some projects that are stored on GitHub, as probably many of us do, I can totally work on them in VS Code for the web. And there's a few really simple ways that I can do that. In the lower left-hand corner here, I see I have the option to open a remote window, and the commands here are also available through the command palette. So through Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P, also we can access all our commands like we do in desktop. So through here, I can see I have this option to open a remote repository. So I can search through repositories on GitHub and go ahead and open them up really easily in the editor. But also a really neat trick is I can go to any GitHub repository on github.com. So for instance, I have this app that I've been working on, and I can just go ahead and prefix vscode.dev to the beginning of the URL. And what we're going to see happen is it reloads, and then we're going to see that now that project is loaded up in VS Code for the web. And again, it was super fast loading, didn't require any extra install, setup, nothing like that. And now once we're here, we're going to have some other cool features that we can take a look at. So for instance, maybe as I'm working on this project, I realize like, hey, like this specific line here, I want to go ahead and save this for later, or I'm collaborating with some teammates on this project and I want to be able to easily deep link them to this file, or this line in this file really. I can go ahead and right click on it, copy as. I can copy as a GitHub permalink or copy GitHub permalink as Markdown. And then what that looks like is if I paste that there, we can see that it'll then bring me specifically to that line. So it's a pretty cool trick to be able to navigate to specific parts of your repo as well. And again, over in the left here, we're going to have very familiar parts that we're used to in desktop. So we're going to have search. I'm going to go ahead and search my repo. And we're going to see right now we have results in a single file. And that's because it's using GitHub text search, which does provide us some level of accuracy, but we can become even more accurate by enable indexing for exact text searches. And I can choose to either enable indexing just for this repo or for all of my instances. So I'll enable it just for this one. And then once I do that, we can see that it's going to fetch the search index and it's going to then come up with some even more options. So now I have multi-file search, even more accuracy, which is pretty cool. I can go ahead and commit changes really easily. Because I was playing around here earlier, updating the README. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. It's not really an integral change, so I'll say update README. Changes are going to be committed directly to the branch I'm working on. I can just go ahead and commit that. And then this change is already going to be available on my repository. So no extra like Git setup or anything like that, or cloning or saving code to my local machine. It's all still just in the browser. And if at any point I want to go back to that repo that I have in the browser, I can click on this hamburger menu here and I can say go to repository. So I have also really easy going back and forth too. Some other cool features, you can easily create new PRs. The GitHub pull requests and issues extension is going to automatically be included, so you can get those features. That extension is also available in desktop, and so if you've used it at all, we definitely recommend it for using like pull requests and issues and things like that directly in VS Code without having to leave the editor at all. And also, what's cool, click on the gear here, you can switch between stable and insiders even. So if you want some of like the latest features and fixes in VS Code, you don't have to worry about like, oh, like I need to go to some other link or memorize that. You can just click on it right here, which is pretty nice. Yeah, so we can see that there's like a ton of different options here for collaborating, for making changes, really easy integration with GitHub. And so then you may be wondering like, hey, like I'd like to then go ahead and actually like test out my changes, especially if I'm like committing a big one or opening up a big PR. That totally makes sense. But since this is a lightweight version of VS Code running entirely in your browser, there isn't any backend compute. So if you want to like run something in the terminal or run in debug, what you'd want to do is continue working on in another environment. So how you can do that is we see already in the terminal here, it says terminals aren't available in the web editor. To use it, you'd need to continue in another environment. So we're provided easy paths directly here, where you could either clone this repo locally, continue our work there, so we could actually run our code, get the full power of VS Code, or we could even create a new code space on it too. So we have these easy integration points. All right, so that's kind of like a look at some of the GitHub integrations. But beyond even just GitHub, because VS Code for the web has support for other source control repositories as well, we can take a look at support for Azure Repos. So over here, I have the same repository stored on Azure DevOps, since Azure Repos is part of Azure DevOps. And similar to how we saw on github.com, I could just go ahead and prefix vscode.dev to any github.com repo. I can also prefix vscode.dev to any Azure repo or branch or tag. So let's go ahead and try that. I'll go over here. And we're going to see it loads up. And there we go. And something worth noting is that the Azure Repos support is still in preview. So right now the support is read-only. So that's why you're going to see like this little lock here. It's read-only, but it's still an awesome way to go ahead and get this like rich browsing and reading experience directly in the browser. And being able to like search and go to different branches and those kinds of features as well.
So Bridget, if I could jump in just real quick, this is, I mean, there's so many awesome things that I just saw. The prefixing vscode.dev in front of the URL. I didn't even know you could do that. We have a bunch of questions from chat. Do you want to take those now or do you want to wait and go through everything first?
Maybe we could take a couple and then we could take even more at the end if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's just start with the hardest question you'll get this morning. You just go
All right.
directly there. All right,
Sure.
Here it is. So Cyrus wants to know, does this completely replace github.dev?
All right, that's a really good question. So for those of you who have maybe seen github.dev, that's basically a customized version of VS Code for the web. It works on any repo on github.com. You can access it just by hitting the dot key on a GitHub repo, and it'll load up a customized version of VS Code for the web on those repos. And so we consider that to be a really good companion for working with GitHub, making lightweight changes to any repos, and working on PRs. But what's neat about VS Code for the web is it has support for additional repository hosting services and like some even more routes is what we call them. So like while vscode.dev, it'll have the /GitHub route similar to github.dev. It's also going to have like /Azure Repos. And it's also going to have some like other routes that we're taking a look at. So that's kind of like the difference. And so I think github.dev definitely still is like a great companion to GitHub, definitely is like deeply integrated and has great uses. But they kind of have like their separate uses as well, if that makes sense.
It does. And so here's another great question, which I think we can answer real quick and then move on.
Sure.
So does this work on a Chromebook?
Yes, it does. So without having to install anything, it'll be a great tool for things like Chromebooks or scenarios, where maybe you didn't want to or you weren't able to previously install VS Code. So go try it out on a Chromebook and let us know how it works.
I think you can install VS Code on a Chromebook, but I don't think it's very straightforward.
Yeah, we have setup steps, I believe either in a blog post or a doc. So you could check those out as well if you were interested in installing VS Code, but this just takes away those install steps.
Awesome. All right, I will. We'll proceed. I know we've got a lot to cover.
All right, sounds good. So that github.dev question and touching on routes actually sets us up really well for kind of like the next points of the demos, which is this idea of routes and URLs. So up to now, we've seen vscode.dev /GitHub to look at github.com repos. And we've seen /Azure Repos now. So we can look at repos that are part of Azure DevOps. But there's even more routes than that. So similar to desktop VS Code, we can really customize our VS Code for the web experience through rich extensions and things like that. But unlike desktop, we can customize it through these specific URLs and routes. So one that's really cool is we actually have this theme route. So I'll show you what that means. So there's this one theme that I've kind of like heard about, and I've heard that it's really cool, and it's called Night Owl. So I'll search it up here. And what you can do here is you can copy the extension ID of any theme, and then all you have to do is then switch the URL to /theme. So that's going to be like the part of our route here, and then /, and then you can paste the ID of the theme. And so then we're going to see here that our editor reloads, and then we can see that it's installing the theme. And then we see also that the theme took effect now, and we didn't have to like specifically install it from the marketplace there. And so now we're told, like, welcome, here's a preview of Night Owl theme in Visual Studio Code for the web. And so it's neat because we now have these shareable URLs where we can quickly try out different themes that we're curious about, and we can like play around with them. We have these test files, so we can see if we really like them. And we also have the option here to either keep the theme. So, hey, like I really like it. I want to continue doing all of my work in the web with this theme. Or if I want to keep trying out some other ones, maybe I'm not really committed to this theme, I don't have to keep it. So I have a couple of different options here. And what's cool as a theme author yourself or as an extension author is you can actually add a badge to your extension README. So that way users can even more easily try out your themes and like share them with friends and things like that. So I'll go over here. So here we have a theme, and we can see we have this badge, preview in vscode.dev. So I'll click on it. And once I do that, we're going to see that the editor reloads. And now I have a preview of a new theme. So I have the preview of this theme, and I can choose to either keep or don't keep it again. And we're going to see that the URL here is just like the other one that was generated. And if you have an extension that has multiple themes in it, you can either specify which specific theme you want in the URL, or the theme tester is going to automatically choose the first one in that pack. So it's really cool because as an end user, you get these easy URLs where you can try out themes quickly. And as an extension author yourself, you can really help users quickly try out your themes and get even wider adoption of them, which is awesome. All right, so that's one additional route. And then we also have another really cool one that we want to highlight that helps with collaboration, and that is the live share route. So some of you may be familiar with LiveShare, or if you are like an active VS Code user, you probably are familiar with LiveShare, have used it to some extent. But in case you're not, LiveShare is an extension that really helps with collaboration. So it's kind of similar to maybe if you're working on like a document with some other folks and you see everyone's cursors together. And in this case, everyone could maybe be working on some piece of code or a project together and see everyone's like cursors in the code project together. And the live share sessions can either be one-on-one or they can be one-to-many. So like in a classroom setting, live share works out really well. So live share is now enabled in the web. So you can go ahead and install it in VS Code for the web. And you can either start or join live share sessions completely in VS Code for the web, which is awesome. So here I already have live share installed. We can see here that I can either join a session, and I can join a session that was either started in VS Code for the web, or I can actually join a session that was started in VS Code desktop as well. So there's a lot of flexibility, and no matter where I'm working or like my friends and colleagues are working, we can all collaborate together really easily. And if I said share and I generated a URL, I can see here that like if I pasted it, I can click properly, we can see that it actually generates a web URL as well. So I could like go ahead and join it in another tab, for instance. But I'll go ahead and stop that there. I don't think we're super interested in seeing me collaborate with myself on code.
Well, I was going to say we could put the link in the chat and just let everybody join live share all at the same time.
Let it be.
How could that possibly go wrong?
Yeah, right. I don't think sharing like a mass link to people has ever gone wrong in the history of things.
Sorry, chat. I tried.
But yeah, try it out. It does work. So, but yeah, so that's kind of a look at some of like the routes and just like a touch on some of the extensions, for instance, like with live share. But even beyond just live share, there are a lot of really cool extensions that we can go ahead and use on the web. It's worth noting that most UI extensions like themes and snippets and grammars will already work in VS Code for the web. But there are some other interesting extensions as well that do work. So we want to go ahead and highlight some of them and show what you can do already. So for instance, if I go over here, a practice that we typically use on the VS Code team, and you can totally check this out, it's in our public VS Code repo, is we use notebooks for a ton of things. And we'll use that for monitoring issues and monitoring status of like APIs, for instance. And so, for instance, this is one of our notebooks on the team that we use, and we use it to monitor the status of like proposed and enabled APIs and things like that for different iterations. And so what I could do here is, again, because this is a repo on github.com, I could just go ahead and prefix this URL with vscode.dev and a slash. We're going to see it reloads in the web editor. And then what's neat is that it's going to be automatically shown up as a notebook. And so I don't know if you were concerned like, oh, it's just going to show up as like the text. Nope, it's actually a notebook. And that's because the GitHub issues notebook, which allows us to actually run really valuable and interesting GitHub issues queries, is enabled for the web. So for instance, now I could go ahead and run these cells. I could get the results, I could open them up. And so I can fully run the same queries that I would run in desktop VS Code and that kind of thing fully in the browser, which is awesome. And we also have some other cool use cases for like notebooks or running fully things in the browser. And so you may be familiar with like, for instance, like Python notebooks. It's a really common one. So if I go over here, this is a typical Python notebook. It's .ipy notebook, that kind of ending if you've worked with notebooks or you're a data scientist at all in any way. And so you may be looking at this and it's like, first of all, it's like, wow, this is awesome that it like loads up like this in VS Code for the web. But what's cool is that with some like kind of web magic and some really hard work from our team as well, we're able to get it so that Jupyter notebooks can run properly against a PyDide kernel in the web. So here I can actually go ahead and run these cells in the web.
So this
which
is
is
a
really
good time to show this comment, which I've been waiting on, but that's exactly what this comment is can we do what you just did? And so what you just did was you just ran Python in a web browser with no backing compute environment. How in the world is that even possible?
Yep. So we have, I'll show you the extension, but we have this VS Code PyDite extension that one of the engineers, Joyce, on our team has been hard at work developing. And so it provides this kernel for VS Code and for use in the web. And so you can read even more about it through this like README and this kind of thing. But yeah, like there's different experimental technologies with like PyDite and PyLite and those kinds of things to allow us to run Python in the web. And so as these kinds of technologies get further and we experiment more with them, we're going to be able to enable even more experiences in the browser.
Yeah, it's so phenomenal. I think that's, WebAssembly powered, this sort of web containers idea, but that still blows my mind that that's even possible. But all right, go ahead. I know we've got much more to do, and we've got Tana who's patiently waiting on the stream.
It's okay.
All right, we're almost there. Just so many cool things. And then in here, I also happen to have this image. And another engineer on our team, Daniel, he develops this extension called Luna Paint, which allows you to work on images directly in VS Code, which is pretty cool. Because, like, why do you want to leave VS Code for any of your work when you could just continue to work on it directly in your editor? So, for instance, if I open up a PNG, I can see that if I have the Luna Paint extension installed, I could go ahead and work on it. Maybe I want to mark it up. I want to go ahead and circle this. So even more extension power directly in the web. And then I have one other one. And so again, I've kind of been navigating between like going to github.com repos and adding vscode.dev to the URL, but we can totally navigate through them through the lower left here or through commands and say open remote repository and navigate to other commands or other repos rather. So what I could do here is there's one other repo that I want to take a look at. I don't need to save those changes. I'm going to continue on. Another cool extension we have that a colleague that we work with, Jonathan Carter, works on, CodeSwing, allows us to like run basically webby languages directly in the browser as well. And so we have CodeSwing here. So that way, for instance, if I make changes here to like HTML, I can get responses. And then one other thing worth noting is there is another route. So if I update this from GitHub to CodeTour, this repo is cool because it's configured with a CodeTour. And now CodeTour is an extension that allows us to basically have these guides and paths through repositories to maybe have lessons or to teach people a new code base. So we can see here that now the CodeTour is enabled in this repo. And so we can step through it. We can learn more about the repo and all of this. So I can say next and I can step through it, which is really cool. And so now we've seen all these cool extensions that work, but not every extension is going to work in the web. And so, for instance, if I searched up like C++, we can see a variety of these extensions have an exclamation because they're not available in the web. It goes down there. Here we go. Okay, so it's not available in the web. But for languages like C++ and a lot of other languages, I mentioned earlier that a lot of them do have support included automatically in the web. And we can see here a chart of some of that support that is included. And what's cool is the support is built on this open source project called TreeSitter. You can learn even more about it if you look up TreeSitter. But beyond just like the languages like C++ or Rust or Go, you may be wondering like, hey, I have another extension and I'd like to go ahead and enable it in the web. And we definitely want more extension authors to enable their extensions because that provides these really compelling experiences like the ones we've already seen. And so that's what my teammate Tana is going to show you more about. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Tana.
And hey, Tana, if we could, I'm going to start you off with a question before we get started on your demo. And then, folks, we're going to get cut off if you're on Learn TV, but we're going to go long today because we have a lot to cover. So please hang with us on YouTube, youtube.com/code, and that way you won't get cut off. All right, so let's start you off with a quick question, which I think is a good question that some people are going to have, which is, I use Firefox on Ubuntu, and it doesn't have a open folder option available. What's going on?
I actually don't know the answer of that question immediately. Bridget, would you happen to know?
I have Firefox and I don't have open folder available. I think that maybe because Firefox is not like Chrome or Edge, where it doesn't have the access to the local file system through the file system access API. So I'd like to see if you're able to try it all with Chrome and Edge, if that goes away. If you're still having trouble on other browsers as well, definitely let us know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The file system API is supported in Chrome and Edge, but it's not supported in Firefox or Safari yet. And so on places like an iPad, you can't hit your file system, but you can upload a file from an iPad. So you can try that out if you've been coding on an iPad. So with that, sorry, Tana, threw you a curveball there. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. Well, thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah.
Not yet. I gotcha. There we go.
There we go. Okay, cool. All right. So once again, I'm also in vscode.dev, and I actually want to highlight an extension. So there's this extension that lets you make slideshows just directly out of Markdown. It's called MARP. And so my entire slideshow, which is only like 4 slides, is all done through MARP, and it's available on web, which is really cool because then I can quickly just make a slideshow. I did this like last night really quickly, and it looks great, and took me like 5 minutes. So good shout out to Mark. But yeah, so extensions for the web. So you'll see that some of your favorite extensions will work on web, but a lot of them won't. And a big part of that is that like if you have an extension that has code, it's not completely easy to make it work for web right away. Like you just have to do a couple changes. But if you have like a theme or you have a snippets, like any extension that doesn't have a main and is package.json will work. But if you do want to make your extension work, the most important thing you can remember from this part of my talk is this web extension guide. If you click on that, it'll be available here. And it's a little bit lengthy, but it has a really good in-depth overview of everything you need to know, from the anatomy of extensions in the web to like what you need to do, how to create a new one, or how to migrate your own. So I'll quickly go over some of the highlights from that, but I won't go super in depth. I highly recommend reading this if you're actually looking for like a step-by-step guide to migrate your own extensions or to create a new one. So like we mentioned earlier, some of the extensions will work just out of the box, and the other extensions won't, but they're not actually that different from extensions that do work in VS Code Dev. So meaning like a lot of the code that you'll be doing for your extension will probably be about the same. The only difference is that for extensions that run on VS Code Desktop, normally you can just make an extension that has multiple JavaScript files or TypeScript files that become JavaScript files. And you can have multiple of them, and you just link to the first one that has your activate function, and the rest of your extension will just work. And that's the general, like how you make a simple version of how you make a VS Code extension. But for web, we need that extension bundled into one JavaScript file because we load up one single JavaScript file for your extension, and we can't have multiple. So I think that's the biggest challenge, or possibly like the newest thing that for some of you might be learning is how to bundle. So there's a couple different bundlers. We recommended Webpack. That's not the only one. There's many other bundlers, but essentially the goal is to have it down to one JavaScript file. And that is like probably most of the work. So that's part one. And then part two is we have this thing, and I'll just show you the table. This table looks a little bit overwhelming, but it's available online, and I'm just going to kind of going through this list. Part two is that normally an extension that has code has a main, and that's where you point like extension.ts has this activate function. Similarly, we have just a browser entry point. So it's the same thing, but instead you would point it to that one JavaScript file. And I'll show you examples of this right after. And then finally, this is a little bit more of a nuance, but you can't use node libraries in web just because they're not built into the browser. So libraries like FS, Path, OS, all the other built-in node libraries that you might be using in your extension, unfortunately, you can't use them directly on the web. So you need to use a web compliant version. So either you can use like, there's a lot of NPM libraries that have like a substitute for some of these node libraries that are web friendly, like Path Browserify or OS Browserify. Or you can add some fallback functions like, hey, if this node specific library doesn't work, then I'll do this instead. You just need to add some fallbacks for that. And you can do this through Webpack. So Webpack has some really cool like configuration so you can have fallbacks in certain environments. So that's the other caveat. And then along with that, file system is quite important. You want to read, like if you have an extension and you want to read all the files of their workspace or what they're working on, the best equivalent to that for web is the VS Code file system provider, which is an API that's created just to help you open files, read files, write files, everything. So I actually have it open here. This link will just open up the vscode.dev, like the interface file that explains all the different functions available. So you can have like watching for changes in the file, any information about the file, reading directories, creating directories, everything is available through here. So that, I'll close these so I don't get distracted. So that would be another important part, is going through, if you have any code that involves working with the file system, to replace it with the VS Code file system provider. It's pretty similar, but there's just a little bit of syntactical difference with those. So to actually show what this looks like, a couple of months ago, Martin and I, another engineer on the team, we decided to help some of the popular extensions migrate, just to see what it's like to A, migrate, and B, just help kickstart having more extensions on the web. So we went through some of the popular ones and we helped make PRs to actually migrate them over to the web. So I was going to show you 2 of them that I worked on and what I needed to do. These are simpler examples, but I think they cover most cases. So the first one was Rainbow Indent. So essentially, it's an extension that like colorizes the indent so you can see it easier. And this one was pretty simple. I'll show you here, and then I'll also show you on VS Code. Essentially, the first thing was I had to add a Webpack file because they didn't have any bundling before. They just had TypeScript compiling, which is completely normal for a VS Code desktop extension, but we needed to add a Webpack bundler so we can make it into one file. And then we needed to add some fields to the package.json. I'm going to jump into VS Code because I just like the way VS Code is just easier for me to parse. So while we're here, this is the Webpack file that I added. This is the project. The main thing is you can actually copy this directly from the guide. It's available, so you can just copy it right off. And it has everything that you mainly need. So some key parts is you need to make sure that the target is web worker. A lot of times when you're making extensions, you would want the target to be Node because that works for desktop. But for this one, since you want it to work on web, you need a web worker. When I mentioned that you might need some fallbacks for some functions that might not work on web, or some modules that might not work, you can add the fallbacks here under this resolve. This is the same as your main normally, where you point to where your extension starts. And then the rest of it you can kind of copy, but they're just dealing with like loading TypeScript and so on, and like what to output the file as. So that was the first main thing you need. And you can copy and paste this directly from the guide if you're not really familiar with Webpack and you just want a starting point.
Yeah, that was my first question, Tana, is that I am very scared of Webpack chat. I'm just going to be honest. And so does this just kind of work for every extension? I just need to add this Webpack file?
Yeah, essentially. You might need to adjust these where your extension starts, because I mean, this one starts in source, but maybe you have like a different folder structure. So you just need to adjust this. And I actually have another example of a Webpack change, but this one is like a copy paste from the guide.
Okay.
And all you have to do is maybe change this and be wary of where you're outputting. So in this one, when it's bundled, the final file will be uploaded onto dis/web folder. So you just need to be aware of where the file is going to end up and where your extension starts.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you and then the last part is if you added like libraries like Path Browserify, you kind of just have to add this as well. So this one's saying like if you see an assert, use my like npm library of assert. So similarly, I would do, just for example, I would do path and then require resolve, and then I would do path browserify, and whatever else you use to like substitute, you just list them here. So yeah, This is a copy paste once again, so you can check that out. And you can also, of course, look at Webpack documentation, and that will explain a lot more of the fields. We tried to, in the guide, explain what some of these fields mean to give you a general idea, but we don't go as in depth as the actual Webpack documentation. So
makes sense. And I can copy paste. I mean, that's how I got this far in my career, is copy and pasting from Stack Overflow. It's an honest moment, chat. I'm not embarrassed. I am who I am. Sorry, Tana.
It's okay. We've all had that phase and probably are still in that phase.
Yeah. How to link a style sheet. I Google it at least once a week.
Of course. Me too. I don't remember all the. Anyways, so that's the first part, is you have your file. So that's cool. You have one JavaScript file. Let's see. Here I have one JavaScript file. This one, less important. This is the main important one. So this is the entire extension created into one file. And then we just have to add some things to our package.json. So similar to how we have a main here, and before the main was just pointing to the actual extension over here. Now we, they had an out folder because they had TypeScript. So it's pointing, I don't have it built right here, but it was pointing to the TypeScript generated code. Now instead, we also want to have a browser point, and this points to our single file. So that's why it's important to remember where it is. And then you just need to add some scripts to compile Webpack. This is also copy and pastable from the docs, from the guide. So you just need to add some scripts to compile it, to package it, to watch it if you want to watch for changes while you're working on it. And be sure to make sure that you also call that packaging before you publish your extension. So that's also available on web properly. And then you would just install the required dependencies. Probably like it'll complain at you, hey, you don't have this, and then you just npm install it. So that's like the simple change. And this is with an extension that didn't have any Webpack before. So we added this file, and it didn't use any like node libraries. So there was really no necessity for doing any of that either. So that's a simpler one. I'm going to close this for now. And then, didn't expect to go there. And then we have a slightly more interesting example, but not too hard still. So there's another extension called Color Highlight, and what it does essentially shows you the color of the color hex code in VS Code. So like when you have hashtag, I don't know, like 00000, it'll like actually color it around it, the color. So this one, they actually already had Webpack bundling for their normal extension. So all I had to do was kind of edit their current Webpack bundling. And I'll show you guys like a cool way to do that if you already have Webpack bundling. And then the same things as before, adding those browser entry points, any libraries we've subbed. So in this one, I did use Path Browserify because I used Path a couple times. But here, I will show you what the Webpack file looks like. Now, this one's going to look a little bit different and not a copy and paste, but I will explain what we did. And it's not too bad. So essentially, whatever they had initially in their Webpack file, it was mainly all of this stuff and all of this. And pretty much it's saying like, okay, this is where the extension starts. This is common amongst all VS Code extensions to say that VS Code is an external library that you don't need to get. And this is just to read the JavaScript files. And then they had the target being Node. So this is so it works on on dev, like desktop. And then where like the file gets outputted. So what I did was I took that and I broke it apart. So I said, okay, this is the stuff that I want to be common amongst, sorry, I keep highlighting. This is the stuff I want to be common amongst both types of extension, like both web and the desktop version will use this. Like they both have the same entry point. They both use VS Code. They both will load JavaScript. So I put that under this variable called base config. And then I said, okay, the Node version will use everything the base one has, but instead the target will be Node and the output will be called extension-node. And similarly, the web one will be everything that the base has, but the target will be web worker. The output will be extension-web. And here's where I added, okay, if I see path, I want to use path browserify. In this case, I just said if I see FS, I'll set it to false. I don't exactly remember right now why I did that, but essentially this is adding a fallback for FS. So saying like if you ever did like fs.read file, it would be like false.read file, so it would complain. And I probably did that just to verify it, but anyways. So it's like really similar, except we just added some specific stuff for web and some specific stuff for Node. And then you can say, hey, I'm just going to export both of these. And so both of these will now work, and both of them will generate a file. Like both of them will each generate a file. So you can see there's one for Node and one for web. So both of them generated their own file when you run it. And so then when you have that, which is helpful, let's look at the main. So now we can just use the respective Node or web versions. So you can just put that in there, and then they already had all the scripts. Where's the scripts? They already had all the Webpack scripts because they were using Webpack already, so I didn't have to do anything there. And then, as you saw, I added just one library, path browserify, to help with any like path calls they had. So these are the two changes I did. And now you're probably wondering, okay, how can I actually like test this, like make sure it works on web? Because I'm not really sure. And normally, like I would just go like, hey, launch extension. So luckily you can do that. And in the guide, we actually have 3 ways to run your extension, your web extension, test it out. There's a launch config, so you can run your extension in a extension host that's catered to be like web-esque. So you could do that to start off. And I think that's the preferred way if you're just debugging, because you can then still set breakpoints, still debug like normal, but it's like a web-friendly version or like a web-catered version. So you can start off with that. And then if you wanted to like take it up a notch and say, okay, like I want to see it in the browser, but I still like want it to be kind of semi-easy to debug, we created a library. And let me see if I still have, I should have kept the docs open, but no worries. I can just click on this. Sorry, this looks very long and intimidating. It's not as bad when you're actually reading it, but we just wanted to be as thorough as possible. See, this is the Webpack file that you can copy. We just wanted to be as thorough as possible so you get an idea. So that was the first type I said, that you can run it directly on desktop with the launch config that says like this is the development kind is web, so then it runs in a web extension host. Secondly, our Martin on our team, another engineer, he created this library called VS Code Test Web. It's a Node module. Essentially what it does is it opens up a Chromium instance, so like a fresh, like kind of bare bones browser, and then puts a vscode.dev on it as well as your extension on it. So you get like a very isolated container of like a very like isolated browser that doesn't have all the extra layers of a normal browser like Edge or Chrome. But you can see your extension and you can see vscode.dev together. So that's like the second way. And then that's a little bit easier because then you're not dealing with like all the other weird nonsense that comes on top of browsers, because browsers have a lot going on. And then this last option, which is the one I'll just quickly show you now, is you can actually sideload your extension directly onto vscode.dev to see it in its final like environment. And we definitely recommend doing this at the end just to verify it works, just because like browsers do have extra stuff going on. And so sometimes you just want to make sure it looks right in productized environment, so that before you publish, you're like 100% confident. So I'll show you guys how to do this part, because the rest of them kind of like you can just follow the instructions. They're pretty doable. So for this one, really what you need to do is you need to host your extension from your machine for vscode.dev to go fetch and download and then load onto vscode.dev. So you just can use these 2 scripts. So you can run a server that's hosting your files here, and then you can run a tunnel to actually create a URL out of it. So I'll do that with this color highlight extension. I just want to close that. Okay, so I actually already tried it once before this call, so I have all the scripts already. But firstly, I'm running npx serve course on port 5000. So you can run that first. Cool, that looks good. And then I'm gonna create a URL for it. Cool, and then this is a really important part that I always forget, is you need to click on this URL and you need to click to continue, and that makes it available for everyone.
Terrible gecko. That's all right.
Yeah, the names are really funny. I do enjoy all the names. I wonder what repo of like words they're using, but it's pretty
I feel
funny.
like that's not fair to geckos, but
Oh, poor geckos. Yeah, so really important though, that blue button. I've messed up so many times forgetting to click that blue button and then, hey, it doesn't work. Remember to click on the blue button. And then I have my other extension open that had a style sheet in it with some colors. And so let's verify this works. So you can, in any vscode.dev like web page, you can go to the command palette. So for me, it's Command-Shift-P. For you, it's Control-Shift-P if you're on Windows. And you'll see this command called install web extension. So hit that. You enter the terrible gecko or whatever URL you were given. You hit install. And then it takes a second, and cool. And that looks exactly like we expected on web. So this extension is good to go and good to publish. So yeah, that's kind of the general steps you want to go through. Going back to my slideshow to see if I had anything I missed. So we'll have this up so you can actually see this table if you'd like. And as part of those efforts that we were talking about earlier, where we made a bunch of PRs, I've linked several of them, going from like simpler to more difficult ones. So if you'd like to see the changes, if that's helpful for you in your time of migrating or creating your own extension, feel free to look at these. So yeah, that's all.
Well, thank you very much. That was quite the deep dive. I know, chat, we went over a lot of stuff in the stream and we're actually gone way long, but we're going to keep going a little. I mean, we're already way over, so we might as well take some questions. But I do want to do that. There were several comments about, are we going to offer this content, in tutorial format? And I think that that's something for us to consider. That was in the chat. Breaking these things down that we talked about here and maybe providing some more tutorials on how to do that. Tana, I didn't know if there was, other than the docs, do we have videos or tutorials on how to create web extensions at the moment?
Not the moment, no. We just have the one large doc.
Okay.
But yeah, we can definitely consider that for the future, like soon. And like
maybe we'll have you back and build one from scratch here. So let me run through. There's so many comments here, and so by the way, Alessandro is the person in the background who answers your comments chat. So if you're wondering who that is in chat, that's Alessandro diligently answering comments here and chatting back and forth with you. Let me see here. Will the PWA get a better icon? I don't know what that means. Is the icon bad for the PWA?
Somebody raised an issue on that, like a tweet yesterday, and so I filed an issue on that, and there's discussion on that, and so we did look. That was something that we looked into before launch, and so yeah, we're investigating that. So thanks for raising.
That's a good one. I didn't even realize that somebody's PWAs. That's awesome. Okay, what about this one? My terminal's missing.
Yeah, so I guess to expand on that one, if you're not able to load the terminal at all, that would be different. But maybe if it's like you just see the continue working on, or like just the message that terminals aren't available, that is expected since there isn't any backing compute in just this like lightweight version of VS Code running in the browser. So if you are looking for the full ability to run commands in the terminal and things like that, that's where you would want to continue working locally or in another environment like a GitHub code space.
What about this one? I don't know that I necessarily understand this question, but let's look at it anyway. So Clovis said, is there a way to combine extensions installed with the extensions used in the browser? Do y'all understand that?
Like an extension pack? Or
I have no idea. What the question is.
My first one just extension pack, and you can combine extensions in an extension pack. And
like that might have been answered, it looks like.
Okay.
Oh, okay. They got it in there.
But let us know if it wasn't. We're happy to follow up.
Let's see. What about this one? This is pretty good. I think we've answered this before, actually, in a TikTok video.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, I think we do have a TikTok on that, but we do use VS Code to develop VS Code. So you can feel if that's a little bit meta or inception. We absolutely use it.
That is true. All right, let's see here. Sorry, chat. I'm scrolling up. There's so many comments. All right, what about this? This question is about like, if you go to the site, your code is loaded into the browser storage, but what about if you go offline? So I noticed that when you did the indexing, it sort of popped up and was like, hey, we're going to clone this into your browser storage. And what that tells me is that it's cloning it into local storage and then running the index. But I think that if you go offline with your code loaded in, does it still work?
So you could still work on it offline, but like if you tried, you couldn't be able to like commit a change, for instance. And so if you were trying to work on like a GitHub or an Azure repo or something like that, it could maybe get a little bit tricky in that sense. So like if you're trying to commit like a GitHub repo change, that's where like offline, you would see a difference in support.
But when you're working on a GitHub repo and you save a change, doesn't it save directly to GitHub, or does it save to an intermediate? Like what happens if you're in that intermediary state where you're on a GitHub repo, you make a change, but you're offline?
I don't think it like quote saves, because it's like the files are cloned into this like one instance of your browser, and like saving it would really be committing. Unless you're working off of local files on your machine, and when you hit save on vscode.dev, it would save the actual local file.
So that would still work, but it wouldn't work for connected to repos.
No, I believe you have to commit to actually like quote unquote save it.
Yeah, that's what I think too, and that makes sense. Let's see. So here's one. I would love to work on a real-time collab extension for this. I don't know what this is. Seeing vscode.dev, but I think LiveShare does work today, right? We talked about
it. It does work today, yeah. And definitely let us know how the experience is. The LiveShare team is eager for feedback as well.
Here's one that doesn't have anything to do with vscode.dev, but I think we should answer it anyway. Why is VS Code very fond of my RAM?
I like the use of very fond.
That's I know, good use of the word fond. That's nicely answered, nicely asked question. What's the answer there?
I think we need to learn more about what are you doing that is like causing this. So if you can give us some more information about what you're seeing, let us know, and we're happy to investigate further.
Let's see. Daniel was asking, how do I get Luna Paint to work? It should just work, right? Just install.
Yeah, you should just be able to install Luna Paint. You can look it up in the extension marketplace. Yeah, go ahead and give it a shot, Burke.
All right.
Yeah, you can just.
Let me see if there's anywhere missing. Alessandra's trying to chat to me here. Okay, cool. Let's see.
Did you click install?
Oh, I haven't clicked yet.
So this is just more of a shout out, but Peter said, very significant evolution of VS Code. Thanks to the great minds who made it. It was my idea. No, it wasn't. It was totally not my idea at all.
Burke takes complete credit.
Right. Oh, yeah, it was that's the VS Code team is and watch the video from Eric Gamma from VS Code Day. It's really eye-opening the way that they've thought about this and the way that it's been built. One of the questions that we got on TikTok early on is, why is VS Code so fast as an Electron app when Electron apps are not notorious for being fast? Like, that's not what they're known for. And the answer that was given by Johannes Ricken on the team is that it's because VS Code was originally built as a website. It's an editor in the browser. And because they had always targeted the web, it was very fast in Electron, but that also makes it much easier to go to the web as the editor, as the end goal there. So I'd watch that. It's a very interesting talk from Eric, and he says it a lot better than I just did. Okay. Let's see. I'm looking. Any other comments I should answer here? There's so many. I'm sorry for all the folks we missed, but I want to thank everyone for being with us today. I don't know how to remove this comment. We're just stuck.
It's a great way to end it, though. I mean, I think it's a good one. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Alessandra, bailing me out. Check out the official blog post on this because a lot of the details are in there. Thank you for your comments about breaking this out into smaller pieces because I know we did go over a lot. Thank you for being with us today. Use vscode.dev, build web extensions, send us your feedback. Issues, go to the VS Code repo, so github.com/Microsoft/VS Code. You can go there if you've got issues that you'd like to open or PRs that you'd like to make. As always, we welcome you. Thank you, Tana. Thank you, Bridget, for being with us today. We'll see all of you folks next week.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks.